Melissa Maerz, whose name I did not check if I was pronouncing correctly before I said it. I'm so sorry.
You know what? Everyone mispronounces it, even people I've known for years. So it's okay. It's Mertz, but you were very close.
Maerz. It's
Yeah.
Maerz. Okay, which I should have, like I should have known that. Melissa Maerz, thank you, by gosh, so much for coming on the Cosmic Cheeto podcast. Man, it is such a delight to have you here. Big fan of your journalism. So excited to talk about this book of yours, the book you're working on. Um, I can't wait to dive into this. Before I introduce you, I just wanna thank you
Well, thank you
publicly.
so much for having me on. I feel like I knew I liked you the moment I met you at Powell's in Portland, and it just feels like a really special thing to be on this. Thank you.
I felt the same way. I felt the same way. For a little context for home viewers, listeners, whoever you are, um, I, Melissa and I met at a really great reading at Powell, the ML Rio, her reading. And yeah, your kind of like your conversation with M, and then like, just like talking to you later, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to hang out with you. I have to be your friend. And of course, because you've had such an illustrious journalism career, I've read your stuff before. So it was amazing to put an kind of like the face to the byline. I will now introduce you for those of you who are just meeting Melissa. She is not only the author of All Right, All Right, All Right, the oral history of Richard Linklater's Dazed and Confused, which is such a delight. It's kind of a hilarious romp. I'm so glad that you created this book, um, compiled this book, right? It's kind of like it's like a Talmudic project, getting everybody together. Um, but you have also been an editor at Rolling Stone, a senior editor, like a critic, I think a critic at large, yeah, and Entertainment Weekly and the Los Angeles Times, a supervising producer at HBO's Vice News Tonight, and a founding editor of New York Magazine's Vulture website. Not to mention coming up in the Alt Weekly Minneapolis scene, for which you won, I think, a number of awards for your fantastic culture, like music journalism, your arts journalism has been so fabulous, Melissa. You live right now in Portland, Oregon, which is where we met, and you are working on your next book. So I'm looking forward to chatting a bit more about that. Melissa, did you want to read a selection from All Right, All Right, All Right?
Sure. Yeah. So it's an oral history of Dazed and Confused, as you said, and it might just be easier to read a little bit from the introduction. So I'm going to
Please.
start. Richard Linklater talks in the beginning of this book about how he thought he was making an anti-nostalgia movie with Dazed and Confused. So I'll start with that. Obviously, I draw a lot of creative inspiration from the past, what people would call nostalgia, says Linklater, who is surrounded by classic movie posters in his office in Northeast Austin. But when I was making Dazed, I was thinking about how nostalgia can be a dangerous thing. People are nostalgic for times that never fucking existed. When you think about the past, you have to try to remember what was really going on. When people say, oh, those were the good times, I always have to remind them, no, that time sucked. This was the surprising goal behind Dazed and Confused. He wanted to show how much the 70s sucked. As a thoughtful teenager growing up in the East Texas town of Huntsville in the late 1970s, Linklater was disgusted by adults' nostalgia for the 1960s. What a great time, he says, laughing. Rioting, war, assassinations. But his generation ended up having the same feelings about the 1970s. That's just the way nostalgia works. It's not a collection of memories, but a reinvention of memory itself. It's misremembering your own life on purpose. Linklater intuitively distrusted that type of sunny revisionist thinking, even when he was too young to fully understand it. I remember my football coaches being like, these are the best years of your life. And me being like, fuck, I hope not. There's got to be something better, he says. That scene in the movie where Pink says, if I ever start referring to these as the best years of my life, remind me to kill myself. That's me reminding my younger self. The film is set on the last day of high school in spring 1976 in a small, unnamed Texas town. Its main character, Pink, played by Jason London, is the quarterback, the popular kid, the guy in that multiple hot girls want to make out with. In a different kind of movie, he would be having the time of his life. Instead, he's acutely aware that he's stuck in this place, surrounded by small-minded adults, and determined to avoid becoming one of them. Pink is a stand-in for Linklater, who played quarterback his junior year. Mitch, the skinny, awkward freshman played by Wiley Wiggins, is also a stand-in for Linklater. Whatever Pink talks to Mitch, that's me talking to my younger self, he points out. It was 1992 when Linklater started production on Dazed. He was 31 years old. He'd spent most of the previous decade unemployed with no college degree and a stack of unpaid credit card bills. This had always been kind of the plan. Linklater was a deeply anti-establishment guy who'd never wanted a day job, a marriage, or any of the other trappings he viewed as distractions from making movies. His 1991 breakthrough film, Slacker, a shaggy dog story about young misfits killing time in Austin, much as Linklater had in his 20s, established him as a major talent and a generational voice, but it also left him deeply in debt. His plan was not exactly foolproof. If Universal Pictures hadn't greenlit Dazed, he might have been forced to take a far less creative path in the corporate world. This is not only his first shot at making a studio film, it was likely his last. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Melissa. You know, that like the way that you engage Richard Linklater in conversation and just also just like introduce him. It's you have this you've done this with each one of your subjects who, as I've mentioned, have been like kind of era defining figures for me at various times. But like going into this book, I would not have expected the man who spent a decade making Boyhood to be like, who cares if my house burned down? Everything
Yeah.
who cares, you know? And but the way I feel like you kind of approached him about that was just it was a new side of Linklater that I think I felt like I had access to through like just whatever other interviews, but it you managed to pull out this side of him where like when I go back now and watch his films, I'm like, oh shit, oh my God, yes. Like it's kind of one of those like almost conspiracy moments. Oh, it all makes sense now. This guy is
Right.
anti-nostalgia. This guy is like, has this almost kind of Zen-like relationship with past, present, and future. And
Yeah.
I maybe I know it's not one of the questions that I prepared for you, but what's kind of coming up is how do you manage to engage your sources in this kind of like offhanded and really like vulnerable and vital way? You've done it time and again, and I'm assuming you continue
Well, with this project, I just feel like I was really lucky, and probably my ignorance of how to do something like this helped me.
to.
Because I thought, I'll just write him a letter and tell him I want to write this book. And I don't think I realized at the time how that really doesn't work out all that often. But I think I was really lucky that Linklater is somebody who really likes to support the arts. He still has the Austin Film Society. I mean, he really has been helping, indie filmmakers. Like this is kind of his thing and who he is. So I think he read that letter from me and thought, okay. But even in the beginning, when I approached him about it, he was like, I don't know. I think that movie's kind of middling. It's not my best. I don't really feel like talking about it. But if you want one interview with me, I will give it to you. But then over time, he would kind of say, hey, did you see this thing? Or did you check out this thing? Or have you talked to this person? And I think the more I talked to him, the more open he got. And the other way I think I was really lucky is that a lot of people, there were two things that made people really willing to talk to me. One is that for a lot of people, it was their first experience with a real studio film. So, of course, they're going to remember it way more vividly than they would a movie that came much later. It was a movie that was the breakout movie for Matthew McConaughey and Ben Affleck and Parker Posey. I mean, just like a ton of people. So that was good. And the other thing is that a lot of people, it was the only movie they were involved in that they just got out of the
Yeah.
industry afterwards. So I think
Yes.
because of that, it was really vivid. So, for example, I think the first interview I did for the entire book was with the unit publicist. And I
Mm.
just wrote to him kind of I didn't even know if I was going to interview him. I just thought like maybe he has some materials, some archival materials I can look through. And he called me back immediately and I interviewed him for 3 hours. And he stayed in the hotel room with all of those actors. I mean, he was
Oh,
really kind of in the center of the scene and remembered everything.
yeah.
And everything he said checked out when I interviewed other people. So I think, yeah, timing and where people were at in their lives and Richard Linklater made a big difference in making that easy.
I'm not surprised, right, that Richard Linklater is someone who responded to a kind of out of the blue, very arts based or like highly literary, like I want to do this ultra specific project kind of request. And, I can imagine his only hedge being just what you said, right? It's like, well, make it about what about something else? As
Yeah.
opposed to the firewall is up. You may not talk
Yeah.
to me about my about my Shaggy Dog indie. Well, it's his first studio, but it still feels kind of indie
Yeah.
films. And, I'm on the topic of all right, all right, all right, which we're going to talk about for a while before we dive into your other work. I, you say, I think just like so aptly that like this is a movie that is an anti nostalgia film, an anti 1970s pay-in, and except it kind of ends up making everyone feel sort of nostalgic,
Yeah.
not just for the 70s, which many of these actors did not even experience, right? But for just like adolescence in general, right? I mean, even if we don't want to return to those difficult years, there's this kind of the movie um captures this like being young and being kind of frustrated and maybe directionless but highly energetic sensibility that it's just like so much of Linklater's work is like kind of diametrically opposed to itself, but in like fun ways. It's like this is not nostalgic, except you're gonna feel kind of warm and weird when you watch it, and like maybe a little stoned. And so the way you summed this up, Melissa, I just thought was like so dead on. You described nostalgia as being not a collection of memories, but a reinvention of memory itself. It's misremembering your own life on purpose, right? Which I think is so much more of an apt way of putting this than like I need the past to be the present, right? There's something
Right.
else going on there. And I'm wondering if you can talk about how that like concept of nostalgia took shape for you as you were researching all right, all right, all right, and maybe how it's even taken shape in your own life.
Yeah, so I mean, I think like Richard Linklater, I've always thought of myself as being a very anti-nostalgia person, but I think in the process of writing this book, I realized it's impossible to write about the past without it being nostalgic for some people. Like I think I thought I was writing a book about this kind of difficult time in film history where all of these very indie filmmakers were being snapped up by the studios for making these, 6 million budget low budget for the studios at the time movies, and how there was a lot of conflict between the production side of this and the studio side of this and the director side of this and the indie actor side of this, and that it would be kind of a portrait of that time too. And then I didn't realize that interviewing all these people, they'd be like, God, what a great time in indie film. So because it's like, I interviewed the director Andrew Bujalski, whose work I love too, because he lives in Texas, and I wanted to talk to him about this nostalgia around Austin, where, if you talk to people in the 90s, they'd say, oh, you missed it. It was better in the 70s. Or you talk to people in the aughts, they'd be like, you missed it. It was better in the 90s. And he said, I think when people talk about nostalgia for the good times, they're really talking about nostalgia for being in their 20s. And I think that that's very true. Like you look at, best albums of all time lists, they're so often clocked to the critics who were a certain age when they bought those
Yes.
records to begin with.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. I'm very excited to dive into that with you. It's like in particular, because I think that is, oh God, that's so true. But it's too right. It's like, and it's not that I reject that this like new definition of nostalgia, newish definition of nostalgia, where it's like you kind of miss being in your 20s, you want to be in your 20s again. But it's also like with the misremembering of the past, right? It's like you're not always it's you're not always like wanting to go back to it, and you're not always remembering it as it happened. there's almost like a satisfaction in saying, ah, sorry, you just missed the 70s, right? And like you talk about that opening scene, right, with like sweet emotion playing over the caddy, like pulling up, and like Ben Affleck is like, oh, I'm really nostalgic for this time, right? Quote unquote. I mean, for the time that I
Yeah.
never experienced. That who could not feel that like the 70s were a tremendous decade, despite Richard Linklater's thesis here. And
Yeah.
it so that's I'm wondering like if even if you could speak to that, right? Like nostalgia wanting something that maybe never even existed. Maybe you didn't know it or it wasn't even there.
I mean, that's a big part of this too, right? I mean, this quote isn't in the book, but I remember talking to Richard Linklater about Make America Great Again. He's like, when was America great?
Right,
Like
right,
what they're remembering is an America that didn't exist,
right.
filtering it out to remember the things that they want to remember. But there's so many levels of that in this movie, right? There's nostalgia for the 70s. There's now nostalgia for the 90s when it was made. There's the people who I interviewed, the actors I interviewed being nostalgic for being in their 20s. I mean, there's just so many levels of this and, remembering or choosing to misremember certain things as they are. And I think what you said about it not really being accurate of the past is true too. Somebody I interviewed for this book was talking about how I think it was Jay Duplass. Talking about how now in Hollywood, it's really hot to get something made in a time before social media existed, to have it set in a time before social media, because young kids are nostalgic for that, or teenagers are nostalgic for that, even though they never lived through it. So I think a lot of nostalgia is either being nostalgic for something that hasn't even ended yet, which you see in the movie, right? You see them playing Tuesday is Gone when the keg party isn't even over yet. They're already nostalgic for it. And also kids being nostalgic for a time they didn't get to live through, which you also see in the movie. You see them talking about the 60s and how they missed it. They missed like the summer of love kind of era. So I think that still happens now.
It makes me wonder, right, if the entire plot of Swan's Way isn't just nostalgia, right? How do we know he's remembering Swan and Odette exactly? I
Right. If
don't
only we
know.
could fact check.
If you only could fact check, I know. It's just such a like really cool way, I think, to think about like how we like embrace or construct a sense of the past or like a hypothetical past through media and
Yes.
through senses. Yeah, it's really cool.
Do you find
Um,
yourself doing that? Are you a nostalgic person?
so th I'm excited to dive into this because I'm like you and Richard Linklater, right? Like we're of this really really exclusive club where we're like we're not nostalgic. Though I have been in past my life very sentimental, very nostalgic. I'm really not anymore.
Yeah.
Except I love to misremember and idealize aspects of my past. Like I love to be like, so it's the 2010s, thinking about the 2010s as this really just kind of harebrained time when I was in my 20s and everything felt like shit all of the goddamn time. And the zeitgeist was all about like did you use the most inclusive language? Like have you
Right.
done this? Have you done that? And there's this kind of intense paranoia that it's stopped being progressivism and started becoming, surveillance.
Yeah.
And that sucked, except here I am listening to old Crow Medicine Show and being like, ah, or
Yeah. Yeah.
watching
Sure.
Girls, right? And being like,
Yeah.
um,
I
yeah,
know.
it's
Well,
it's terrible.
same thing
Yeah.
with me. Like, I mean, I say that I'm an anti-nostalgia person, and yet I made a whole book about a movie from the 90s that I love. So, I mean, you kind of can't avoid it.
And
If
so that's
we're
actually
talking about history, is it automatically nostalgia?
exactly, and that's actually what I wanted to ask you about as well, right? Is like, how is this movie an object of nostalgia for you, right? Like, what are your feelings about it? Like, what kind of comes up for you?
Well, it's one of the reasons I love it so much is that I see it totally differently now than I did when I first saw it. The meaning of it has completely changed. And I feel like all of my favorite art that extends beyond, a short period of time is like that. So for example, I saw it when I was just starting high school. I remember watching it as if it was like science fiction about the future, even though it was set in the past, because I was thinking like, oh, this is what my life is going to be like for the next few years. Like, it's going to be parties and it's going to be, going out in the woods and it's going to be making out to Summer Breeze and like all these fantasies I had about what high school was going to be like. And I didn't even remember really like the bullying part of it. I had just so focused on, the parts that seemed dreamy to me. And now I watch it and I think how sad of a movie it is. Like I think about Ben Affleck's character, always being out of gas and them kind of talking about how he failed high school a bunch of times and like how sad that guy's life might have turned out in the future. And just, I don't know that the speech that Jason London makes about remind me to kill myself if I ever think of these being the best years of my life. I mean, to me, it is sad that there are some people who still believe that they peaked in high school and that things are never going to get better after that. So I see it in much more of a bittersweet way now than I did when I was younger.
That makes a lot of sense. Like I've always found, I don't know, I've always found this movie because like when I watched it, I was well out of high school, and I have always found it to be kind of this, like a lot of Linklater's work. It's like a very shock-worn, well-digested American topic, right? Like high school, boyhood, like slackers hanging out, kind of the Kevin Smith, whatever, we're smoking weed in the city. But then he does this like literary spin on it where it's like you don't, oh, like we have this kind of anti-hero, like harried, neurotic jock who's like, get me out of here.
Yeah,
That like that have we seen that since like Last Picture Show even? It's
that's a great
there's
comparison. Also Texas. Yeah.
that also, oh, good point. Thank you. That,
Yeah.
yeah, like that's wow. So definitive Texan movies for me. Um, but yeah, like it's a very there's a nuance to it, and I would agree with you. Such a sadness to it. Matthew McConaughey's character deeply sad. Like there's a
Yeah,
really
for real.
tough,
Yeah.
yeah, character in there too. So there's definitely like when I came to this movie, there was a lot for me about it that was textured and nuanced in a way that it pulled me, I mean, even closer to Linklater's work than I already was. I really have enjoyed a lot of his stuff. I'm curious too, Melissa, because I know you had to round up a lot of people for this movie, and this movie was like, as you said, launched some major A-list careers. I mean, we've got Ben Affleck, Parker Posey, Mila Jovovich, Matthew McConaughey, but then there's also like, major players in the film, like they're there. They're in so many, they're on that call list, like most of the time, right? But they didn't go on to those same A-list careers. Rory Cochrane being a great example, and Wally Wiggins, of
Such a good
course.
actor. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, like, what was it like rounding everyone up? Like, I know that Linklater was pretty open and receptive, and which is wonderful, but you were herding some Hollywood cats there, and I'm just like curious how that went for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime I talk to somebody, I ask them, who else should I talk to? And
Yeah.
for the most part, people had good memories about that movie, even though some people had more complicated memories. But it was just kind of a matter of sometimes people would pass me along to somebody else. And it's funny because Ben Affleck agreed to do it pretty early on. But then I think, and gave me his number. I think it was through Joey Lauren Adams who passed it along to me. And then I think I called him for a year and he didn't call me back until the very end. And then gave me an amazing interview. So I was a
Uh,
little bit like, I don't know if he's gonna actually come through. But he did and was so thoughtful. So it was just kind of a matter of like, I have to let go and know I don't have a lot of control over this. And the people who really want to talk are eventually going to talk. I think Renee Zellweger, who's an extra in that movie, also talked to me at the very last.
right. I saw her in there too. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So,
Oh, I forget. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just kind of like, okay, I talk to who I can. But the what I really loved was talking to Richard Linklater's high school friends. And I think that's part of what made him give me more interviews because he was interested to see what his high school friends said about the movie too. Because whether or not this was intentional, everybody thinks like, oh, that scene, that's about me specifically. And like the
Right.
more specific it gets, the more universal it feels that everybody kind of feels like it's about
Yeah.
them.
Ugh. That's it was so fabulous when you like took you went back to Richard Linklater's high school experience, and also it was so great to hear all these actors talk about their own high school experiences. Really, just even
Yeah.
beyond the actors, everyone was really, who you interviewed. I saw a lot of different people sharing, um, you know, about why their high school experience maps on to the hyper specific high school experience um
Yes. And it's
portrayed in
amazing.
Dazed and
It's
Confused.
like
Yeah,
one of the unit publicists I talked about before.
yeah.
He had this great quote where he was like, "That movie is exactly my life, except that I didn't grow up in Texas and I didn't grow up in a small town and I didn't have a car," and like basically saying that like no parts of it were like his life.
Yeah.
But I think it's the vibe that people feel like it caught the vibe somehow. And I think that movie was like high school for some people because there were certain cliques even on set, and some people felt like they weren't accepted, and there were crushes and like secret affairs, and like
Oh my
even being
God.
part of
Yeah.
this felt like high school because a lot of it is very gossipy. I mean, the structure of this book, I think, feels like a Richard Linklater movie because it's
Yes.
people talking over each other, people
Yeah.
remembering things differently, and there's kind of a vibe to that that feels like high school too.
Absolutely. I thought like this book is it if very Linklater, and if not Linklater, there's also almost like a Robert Altman feel. There's like
Yeah,
like everyone's like, "Hi, whoa,
yeah,
here I am," and it's like a kind of a very pleasant a and almost like a pleasant din because there's never a voice that you can't distinguish. It's not cacophonous. It's like, oh, I love hearing this memory and how this memory contradicts this memory.
yeah.
Um, Going back to my Richard Linklater is like Proust. Weird comparison though,
I love
because
this. Not at all.
he is I just another thing that's like really pulled me to his work from Slackers to Scanner Darkly to like he really, really engages with memory. He
Yeah,
really cares about and like different kind of points of view therein. And I love how your book is also kind of teasing that out. Um, and I want to say last thing, this is the compulsive personal essayist in me, Melissa, but did you ever think about writing an essay called I Called Ben Affleck for a Year? And he finally
I don't think it would be all that interesting. It would just be like, well, he's not picking up.
Yeah, but you could go all Hannah Horvath and like make it really like make it really true. Today
Yeah,
Ben
no, I
Affleck
was just
didn't pick up
the
again.
timing of that worked out well too. But it's funny. A short story. I left my hotel key once, and I was trying to get back into the hotel, and I didn't have ID at the front desk. They didn't believe who I was. And my kid, out of nowhere, I was looking through my phone, and he was like, "Do you have Ben Affleck's phone number on your phone?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Why?" And I was like, "For work." And the one behind the counter heard that and was like, "Oh, it's okay. You can go into your room." So thank you, Ben Affleck, at least for that. They
You hear
believed
that,
I was not
Ben?
a scammer because
He'll
I
totally hear this because he subscribes. He's a paid subscriber.
exactly, yes.
Oh my gosh, that's an amazing. I
No, but
love
it's
that
interesting that
story.
like that he did the interview, which he totally didn't have to do because it's a movie that he cared about so much that he only has two movie posters in his house that are movies
Yeah.
he's been in, and one of them is Dazed and Confused. And I think part of that is that he
Wow.
watched Richard Linklater make movies, and that helped him, become a filmmaker himself. And that it
Oh,
was really like an early
so
time of him
sweet.
being inspired too.
Was what was the second poster? Was it Good Will Hunting?
No, it was God, I gotta remember. It's in the book. Um, oh, it's embarrassing. It's been
Right.
6 years, so I'm gonna have to look it up.
No worries. We'll find, or maybe he'll just comment on the
Exactly.
bottom.
Yes.
That's so cool. So I think that, I mean, and one thing I want to add too, right, is with the, this is something that navigate a lot, right? Like the sort of celebrity, non-celebrity disparity. And this is kind of what I was pointing out in my question about like Cochrane and Wiggins, who are both just like fantastic interviews, have
Yeah.
incredible performances in this film, have amazing things to say, right? Um, but you were like kind of rounding people up who were variously available and not available and yada yada, thank goodness this movie has such great centripetal force that people want to talk about it.
Yeah.
Um, but I, as we're diving, I think more into a conversation about your like journalism and criticism, this is something I just think you balance so well, Melissa. To like I you talk to people who are very famous, right? And the way you profile them, how shall I put this? There's a kind of like friendly, wry detachment and intelligence to your profiles that I don't see as often in profiles today. A lot of I don't know, not to put millennials in the hot seat, but I feel like a lot of younger journalists will profile someone very famous, and well, it's not like it's like this like oh my God, like slavery, whatever, like adoration, like this person is like perfect, but there's a sense of we were taught that like specifically millennials were taught that selling out is great. It's what you do. You have to do it at scale. What is this don't sell out bullshit?
Right, right.
There's been an economic crisis. How the hell can I sell out to as many people as possible? And this
Which I
sense of
get.
like,
Yeah.
which I
Yeah.
totally right, which is yeah,
Yeah.
this is again not me trying to put people down or myself. It's something that's so familiar. But that kind of like external validation, seeking it's a sense of safety, and then turning to someone and being like, "You've got the external validation. How'd you do it?" Oh,
Right.
I think it shows in the profiles, and it's always made me feel a little bit maybe just a little bit more like I'm reading fiction or fan fiction, right? Than when I'm reading journalism from I don't know, just like Gen X, right? Like or like even going way back, like new journalists, of course, like Joe Didion and
Yeah.
Tom Wolfe. There's a different approach to celebrity and being seen and talking to people who are
Yeah.
in that limelight. And I'm wondering if you can speak on that, having come up all, like from the alt weekly scene in the 90s in Minneapolis all the way through, into the 2010s in EW and Rolling Stone. What did you kind of note as you were tracking that progress and interviewing those celebrities?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I remember it almost being kind of the opposite way from what you're talking about millennial culture, like pop culture journalism being back then, almost to like a bad degree, where I remember there being
Mm,
a lot of like, put this person on the cover to sell magazines, but have the tone of this article be, look at this jerk.
ugh,
You know what I mean? Like really kind of just having
yeah.
someone on, like I think about someone like Courtney Love, who I absolutely love, and how often she was put on magazine covers just to totally destroy her in ways that were completely unfair. Um, yeah, there's two poles of it. Like I think the best in between is when you're not like praising someone or taking them down, but you're kind of trying to understand them in some way. But I
Yeah.
do think that, like, I mean, with this book, the more I talk to people in person, the more you kind of can't help but understand them, and the more you understand them, the more you might like them. Like I'll give you an example. So this guy Sean Andrews, who played Pickford in the movie, almost
Mhm.
everybody universally remembers not being able to stand him, that he was a total arrogant jerk, that he said he was going to be Marlon Brando after this movie, that like, people had all of these stories about him. And I kept trying to interview him, and ultimately his people turned me down. I'm not sure why, but I kept thinking, dude, just talk to me. Because if you talk to me, you will automatically have a more nuanced picture of who you are.
Yeah.
Like otherwise, all of these stories that other people are telling, which may or may not be true to him, or true to them, are just going to serve as the whole truth. So it's hard to find that middle ground sometimes, I think.
Absolutely. And that's so like there's such journalistic integrity in what you just said, though, right? Because it's like I'm not going to coerce you into commenting. I'm not going to
Yeah.
print anything that isn't factual or libelous or whatever. But I am giving the opportunity to make this story more nuanced. There's all these other comments that are kind of biased against you. Can you please weigh in? I
Yeah.
feel like that's so different from the piece that just seeks to lambast the
I agree.
source. I don't, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, if let's dive a bit deeper into the 2010s, because that's my 20s era,
Yeah.
and I'm, when I'm going back through your kind of like EW work, your Rolling Stone, your Vice work, you really were like front and center with a lot of people I love, and I find it so interesting, Melissa, to because like when you talked about the well, essentially like the like eye grabbing cover with the cancellation story, right? With like the kind of the smear campaign. I'm thinking of two people you interviewed, Lena Dunham and Louis C.K. And here you are, right? Like kind of we're peaking in like the cultural reckoning, the feminist cultural reckoning of Me Too is happening, right? We're having a lot of like important, I think, cultural reckonings around like race and gender and sexuality, that are in many ways so very valuable, but then of course that paranoia and that surveillance and that kind of like death grip, right, on people's lives and actions is also rearing its head. So you have these different forces coming about. I mean, you have, of course, Louis C.K. really showing up as someone who had at the very least, I think, putting it lightly, misbehaved, right, and exercised some abuses of power or misuses of power. And then you have Lena Dunham, whose big crime was making a brilliant, utterly brilliant lightning in a bottle TV series at 25.
Yeah.
I could
Yeah.
go on about this, but
Yeah.
show
Yeah.
running, directing, writing at 25,
Yeah.
and not um, weighing 117 pounds. Though, of course, right? I can't imagine it would have gone better if she had weighed 117 pounds.
Right.
And I'm just like the last thing I'll say, and then I'll like finally ask my question. When you talk about like the adoration profile versus the cancellation profile, I almost don't see them as opposite ends of the
Mm.
spectrum because I see them both as like F you. It's either like, oh my God, you're famous. How did you get there? You're perfect. You're a god. You're not human. Or F you, you're famous. I deserve to be famous. Being famous is everything. You're not human. So it
Yeah.
kind of comes down to that dehumanization of the source. Um, which it again feels like it lacks integrity because even someone like Louis C.K., who like did have his like misbehaviors, is still a human being and is
Yeah.
still a talented human being. And so that's I think the question I want to ask you, right, is now that we're thankfully on the other side of that long arc of the 2010s, can you maybe share with me a bit about like what it was like what your sensibilities were then and how you kind of maintained your core as an interviewer as like there's a this sort of what I see as a cultural maelstrom kind of moving around you.
I don't know. I don't know how much I maintained my core. I appreciate
I feel like you did.
I appreciate that. I mean, I think with Lena Dunham, she was just somebody who seemed to me to really listen to the criticisms of that show, whether or not you agree with the ways that she addressed them. She seemed really thoughtful about it to me, especially for somebody
Yeah,
who was so young.
I know.
Um, and and that people watching that show believing that it's, a straight autobiographical representation without this feeling of, self-mocking and mocking of that world of privilege. I think we're kind of not really getting what that show was about. Louis C.K. is harder for me because I was such a fan of his show, such a super fan of his show. And so much of his show is about sexual deviance and power, right?
Right.
And I think it made it really hard to watch those episodes knowing what I knew afterward. Um, so yeah, I think it was really probably dependent on the person I was interviewing. Um, I will say that the Louis C.K. piece that was published was very different from the one I turned in originally. And that's all I will say
Really?
about that.
Okay. I won't go deeper into that.
Certain things were taken out.
Very fair.
But this
I
was before, that was before the scandal broke.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure, sure, sure.
But it seemed to be growing.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is
Yeah.
right. Like you were in many ways, and you addressed this in your interview with Lena Dunham. Like there was already pushback. There was
Yeah.
already kind of like scandal and anger, and you were there and talking to these individuals. Another example, I know I brought up old Crow Medicine Show. You did this great, really great profile on a number of folk rock bands in the 2010s and folk rock's resurgence in the era. This music was so era defining for me. I say in my polka dot scarf. Um, Surprise. But I actually think of like, oh man, I'm thinking of, yes, Mumford and Sons. And forgive me, I'm thinking of the name of the a band. I just blanked on his name, the man who left the band because to preserve the safety and integrity of the band because he had tweeted something like saying, "Oh, I enjoyed this book by a conservative author." Do you know who I'm talking about?
I don't remember. I wish I
The
did.
Mumford and Sons band member. Okay.
Yeah.
Never mind then. I'll find his name or I'll link it. I'll link it in here under the interview. But point is, um there was a there wasn't even a schism in the band. It was just this guy stopped drinking. He started reading a lot, which is great, and he read voraciously, and it didn't really matter the political persuasion of the author. He
Mm.
just wanted to learn. And he happened to enjoy a book about that was by an author who was like a conservative speaker
Yeah.
and that caused so much like anger kind of directed at Mumford and Sons and like in concert venues too that he had to leave to keep them safe
Wow.
essentially. Yeah.
Oh, I don't think I even knew that happened. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually did not realize this until like a few months ago. And so it's interesting, Melissa, because I'm wondering like did you like seeing these interview subjects, kind of start to respond to the pressures of the era, like how was it different in the 2010s versus like the 2000s or the late 90s? Like how did you see people responding to this kind of stuff or these shifting political pressures?
Well, in Lena Dunham's case, I feel like she did write some things into the show that were direct responses. Like when
Yeah.
Jezebel would take her to task for something, there'd be a plot in the show about how some website that seemed like it was Jezebel, took her to task for it. Or like when she talked about when people were kind of skewering her for living in New York and only having that character only having white friends. And then she suddenly had her have this very complicated relationship with her black boyfriend. I feel
Uh,
like she was kind of responding almost in real time or as real time as you can get in television to ways that people were writing about her online, which I respected. I mean, I feel like that's kind of a brave thing to do. You can argue about whether or not she actually addressed the problems people were bringing up, but at least she is somebody who has always been brave about, directly answering questions about those controversies.
I absolutely agree, and I don't know. I'll just share my theory here. I think people
Yeah.
were just really jealous. I
Yeah.
think people just couldn't take it because her
Yeah.
talent was undeniable, but she wasn't doing the kind of like she wasn't doing the pieties.
Yeah.
She was not a kind of a different figure in Hollywood. And I mean, I think a lot of
Yeah.
it was easy to like get woke about it instead of
Yeah.
being like, oh shit, I just hate that that's not me.
Right. Yeah.
on the Vogue cover, you
Yeah,
know?
totally. Yeah. Yeah, and like thinking about Louis C.K., who handled it a totally different way, which has always been a great disappointment to me. I'm like, this is a prime thing that he could implement into his comedy, right? This is a
Yes,
learning experience where he realized this is not the way to behave as a human being and could have
yes,
very easily, I mean, his show is famous for this, right? He's had so many episodes where he's talking to another comedian who has a different point of view than him and is criticizing him for something, and they have some kind of discussion, in the episode about this, where you're not really shown like this is the right way or that's the right way, but it's really made him rethink a certain issue. That's a prime thing that a lot of his comedy is about. And I'm like, so after this, he just didn't discuss it at all in his comedy. Like, what happened? I was so ready for him to come back and have a really thoughtful stand-up show about all of
yep.
this. And he just didn't do it at all. So I feel like the people who actually address it, I really respect.
Because it is just like stand up is memoir, stand up is autofiction, stand up is like the
Right.
comedy. It's you can. I mean, I thought John Mulaney's second special was leaps and bounds. I love New in Town, but I thought it was leaps and bounds ahead of him
Yeah.
because he was metabolizing all the shit
Yeah.
that had gone down with addiction and his issues in between.
Yeah. Or like Aziz Ansari, who obviously had a very different situation, but I thought that
Sure.
he addressed it super well in his comedy too. I mean, like you can
Yeah.
do it. It can be done. So
Yes.
yeah.
Can you imagine, right? Like if let's going way back, right, to the kind of like the Courtney Love, Kurt Cobain cultural era, like the like early mid '90s grunge. Can you imagine without, I mean, like light speed, whatever, like kind of hyper reactive internet stuff, but can you imagine the same sort of um like public reprimand and like auto-fictional address happening, or where did you see it happening? Were there like traces of that and then, in the same kind of way they appear now?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that, if you're talking about Courtney Love in particular, like around Kurt Cobain's death was when she started to be online herself. And I think that was a
Sure.
way that she fought back against the press having total control over the way that she was framed, right? There was that Vanity Fair
Yeah.
piece that she said pretty much destroyed her. And then, they took her daughter away after that. And
Ugh,
so I think that that was a time where she was like, all right, AOL is going to have me go on to this chat site and talk directly to people. And that was the very beginning of artists speaking directly to their fans without having to have a journalist contextualize it in whatever way that journalist was going to contextualize it. And I think
yeah.
that's where things were just very slowly starting to shift in the mid 90s, where you could finally do that as an artist.
It's incredible because when you say that, I think of Britney Spears on Instagram much later on, but it's the
Absolutely.
same kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. For better or worse, right? That you have direct access to
And
fans.
that and
Yeah.
that's the right, that's the other side of it is it's like you can tell your story and there's so much more to metabolize.
Yeah.
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 Ugh. I mean, I'm really, as long as we're kind of talking about, I guess, like 2010s autofiction cancellation, getting ahead of the narrative, I'm wondering if there were, like, again, following your own, really, I think, quite illustrious arc, the publications you've written for the producing you've done, video, sound, like, I mean, you really, really have covered a huge swath of cultural territory. Were there any like twists or bends in the zeitgeist that surprised or delighted or disturbed you? With like, oh, I did not expect that to happen. Like, do you have any memories of like cultural shifts where you're like, given everything you reported on?
Yeah. Well, I interviewed Donald Trump very, very early on
Wow.
And it was not, I cannot take any credit for it. I had an editor, I was working at the LA Times, and I had an editor there who not only said that he thought that he was going to be the candidate, but that he had a shot of winning. And I was
Wow.
like, no way. I mean, I've always been bad at predicting what's going to be a success, you know? So, but I was in New York. It was the night of the Comedy Central roast. So I went to
Hmm.
the Comedy Central
Wow.
roast, and then I was supposed to interview him right after the Comedy Central roast. And he was so furious about, even though he signed up for a roast, obviously, he was so furious afterward that he almost couldn't answer the questions. And I was
Oh,
thinking at
me
the time,
too.
what is he going to do if he's so furious about a roast that he signed on for
Oh,
that he can't
bro.
answer interview questions afterward, or can, but very, selectively? What's going to happen,
What's
if
gonna
he
happen?
actually is for real the candidate for president? Um,
Oh man.
so yeah, definitely I was not on the right side of predictions for that. That comes up to me. I mean, I think that, you remember maybe the times, or maybe I remember the times I was wrong about things more than I remember the times that I and other people might have been right.
Real. Well, was there a time when you were wrong where you were like shocked by the wrongness besides Donald Trump? I think a lot of us were like, "What?"
Yeah, yeah, of course. I wasn't the only one there.
Like, definitely not the
Um,
one. Yeah.
Shocked. I mean, you see enough people getting famous or popular or successful in so many weird ways that I think it's more surprising to me when something doesn't take off, that
Mm.
all of the elements are there, that they have
Oh
like a
yeah.
huge team behind them and a ton of money behind them, and some, especially with bands that I was covering, like Justin Timberlake endorsing them, or things like that. That there was ever
Yeah.
so often that there would be these kind of checkbox of things that would put you on a launch pad, and then just like nothing happening.
Dang.
Yeah.
Is there a band that has been lost to time that you feel needs to be rediscovered?
I mean, that's a great question. I can't think off the top of my head. I mean, I can tell you people that I like now that I'm surprised are not more popular, but that's a probably
Do
totally
that.
different thing.
Well, no, I'm excited about that too. Tell me about that. Yeah.
I love this singer-songwriter named Christian Lee Hutson. Do you know who he is?
I don't really know.
So I like to describe him as like if Elliott Smith read a ton of Raymond Carver, that he
Oh,
has these, he's kind of
woo.
folky, but his songs are very storytelling, like in the way that Raymond Carver's
Yeah.
are. And I love his stuff. I think he should be, I mean, he's already very popular. He doesn't need me to say that, but I think he could be even bigger.
Huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an amazing elevator pitch. So I'll
Yeah.
definitely check him out.
How about you? Do you
Um,
have someone who's like that on your?
that's such a yeah, and another great question for me. I think oh, oh man, you're holding my toes to the fire with my my big question. It's funny, Melissa. There are there's so many. I'm gonna do an embarrassing admission right now. There are so many like artists that I have lost track of. I would
Yeah.
probably say circa COVID era. Um, and I went through like I underwent like a pretty intense personal shift, and I like listen to I have my playlist, and they're writing specific, they're book specific
Yeah.
playlists, but I'm not like, oh, like what do I need to discover? Or like, oh, I haven't like listened to the newest Robin album, right? Like I haven't
Yeah.
like listened to like I used to be like really on top of stuff.
Yeah.
Like but since Chappell Rowan became extremely famous and like she achieved major cultural permeation, around that time I really stopped. keeping track of my like smaller artists,
Mm.
and I listen to a lot of like Tibetan tones. I
Yeah,
listen
I
to a
love
lot of
it.
like nature music and do breath
Yeah.
work because, which is great, but it's
Yeah.
just a, like kind of a different era of life. So if you were to go back to like the your question about like my 20s, right? Like how do I feel about or nostalgia of the 20s? Like how do I feel about like a new like Waxahachie album that came out in whatever 2025 versus Neutral Milk Hotels and the Airplane Over the Sea from the late 90s?
Right. For
I
me,
care about the latter. I don't care about the former anymore. Sorry, go on. Yeah.
no, I think part of that is age, though, because you have
Yeah.
the time when you're younger to just sit and listen to something and really think about it. And also for me, it has to do with media because I think about when I was
Yes.
in high school, so often you would get a record where, you would look at the cover. If there was no picture of the artist, you'd have no information about what they look like. Sometimes if when you found out what they look like, you'd be like, "What?" But you'd have no idea what they look like. You have no idea what their backstory was. You have no idea of anything. And would just lie there in your bed, listening to the music and thinking about what it meant. Or I had the luxury of having time to do that when I was a kid. And now I feel like it's so rare that I listen to something that I don't already know something about the artist and what their story is and where they're from and what the lyrics mean. And the music is almost after, it's at the end of the story of all of that. So there's like
Yes.
a mystery that I miss sometimes being involved in. Maybe the problem is I just need to go to a record store or find something online and before I read anything about it, just listening to it first. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's hard to find the time to devote or hard to justify the time of devoting a whole day to just listening to a record and thinking about it.
Well, totally. And I think it's also like, I'm finding more and more often if I'm like listening to current music, right? It's like, and I'm having like a really profound and intense reaction to it. It keeps distilling back to that like heightened emotion, early adulthood era, but just maybe through like a different set of eyes, right? Like I remember I had such a profound reaction to Olivia Rodrigo's first album. Like I
Yeah.
lost it. I was like,
Yeah.
I mean, she's amazing.
Yes.
There's a
Yeah.
reason she's so popular. She's very gifted. But I just remember listening to that and being like, not, of course, not nostalgic for my adolescence or my 20s, but nostalgic for her concept of nostalgia, right? Like she's talking about like
Yeah.
getting her driver's license,
Yeah.
oh god, there's that incredible song, right, where it's called Teenage Dream, and
Yeah.
it's such that brilliant play, right? On other songs of that title, and um I was just like missing her life for her. I was like, oh, you know, and so
Yeah.
it's, I wonder too, right? You're talking about a teenager, like being a teenager in your room, listening to music and like having this sensory experience. I feel like there's been a shift for me, right? Where like I'm the one making the art now. I'm like, not that I'm not constantly influenced by other people's art, but like
Yeah.
there's a there's a sponge era, and then there's like a different era that follows.
Mm.
Jake Wesley Rogers is another example of like a kind of a Gen Z artist. Maybe he's my obscure guy. He's the
Okay.
one who
Yeah.
looks like he's so delightful. He looks like a very young Elton John, and he's so trippy and funny, and his music is very very lovely. But he is also a young gay man kind of singing about the pains and wounds of his youth.
Mm.
And so then I'm feeling sad for him, for his, like I'm wondering if like, does that resonate with you, right? Like
Oh yeah.
the sensibility being formed versus then you're kind of exercising it in your own art or
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that that's a lot of times what criticism is, right? It's like you're making the art. I mean, isn't that like a Roland Barthes thing of the art that you make is in tandem with the person who's making it, that you're creating this art together with your interpretation and their, creation of the original source, that you need both. Um,
Yeah.
so I do think that happens. And I don't know, does it make, I mean, I do find that when I'm writing about the arts, that I'm not really reading or listening to anything that's not on the topic that I'm writing about.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah.
Yeah, is that what you're asking? Like when you're making the art, you're not really thinking about other people's art?
Yes, and also like when you're in a phase of your life where you have your sensibilities are more formed, and you're like, well, I know the
Yes.
art I want to make, right?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Consuming art, yeah, versus as a teenager. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. But what's the answer for you?
I feel, I mean, I feel like it comes back to this nostalgia piece, right? Because it's like I'm in the point of my life. This is why I feel like Linklater post his house burning down, right? Like because I'm in the point of my life where I'm like I I have no interest in like I'm not cruising around in cars and like forming these big heightened sensory memories,
Yeah.
right? Like I have a student of mine took like a creative nonfiction class, another creative nonfiction class where the instructor was like, okay, you're going to write about a sex experience or a drug experience. And, everyone's like writing about their adolescence. And it's a great exercise because it's basically what's a strong sensory memory? What
Yeah.
were the deeply felt emotions? And so it's like that's not the time of my life I'm in. I'm metabolizing that information. I'm turning that into the artwork I'm putting into the world. I'm not like consuming the music that's the soundtrack to like freaking out and falling in love. And so it feels to me, right? Like you can't, I mean, maybe this is why Lena Dunham is such an extraordinary figure
Yeah.
for at least I really do think of voices of the millennial generation because I don't know a whole lot of artists who are like her, who can be living it and then immediately making art of it.
Yeah.
I sure couldn't.
Yeah.
I was not, I was like, if I was producing something, it was not about that. Yeah,
Yeah, and I'm sure all of those team of writers are essential to that too. Like Jenny Connor being her co-writer and like a ton of other
totally.
girls writers helping that too because you need, I mean, the way that it looks at youth despite the fact that she's in that period, I would imagine you'd need some kind of refraction
You,
because you can't just write
yeah,
about it from within it just like you were saying. Yeah.
right. You have to, your house has to have burned down. You
Yes.
have to have moved on. Totally.
Yes, that's well
Uh,
said.
thank you. Melissa, you're at work on another book, which is so exciting. I can't wait to read more by you. I know that we're gonna kind of play it closer to the chest because those works in progress, things can be hairy.
Yeah.
But is there anything you do feel comfortable sharing about that work in progress?
Yeah, it's about four of my favorite musicians from the 90s and how their work kind of seems to be in conversation with each other, how there seem to be coded references to each other. I mean, this is why I'm interested in the early internet that we were talking about before, is I think this was also a time when fans, for the first time, were connecting with other fans and really kind of decoding what these songs were about, whether or not those theories were correct, that this was the first time that was kind of happening on a mass level.
It's so fascinating. Like, I wonder what are your thoughts on fandom? Like 90s versus now? Because man, I know that's a bit of a loaded topic, but
Yeah. Well, I find it so interesting that to me, the obsession with true crime is very similar to something like being obsessed with Taylor Swift's Easter eggs. You know,
sure.
where it's like
Yeah.
like you're getting
Yes.
the brain is is kind of wired to find patterns even when they're not there. Because, if you're out in the wild and you see that the grass is moving in a certain way, it's better for you to believe that a tiger is coming after you. You'll be safer, if you're wrong about that,
Sure.
than to just believe like it's probably just the wind. So I think we're kind of wired to believe that both about true crime and about art. And it becomes tricky when the I don't know. I think that there's like a tipping point between like the thing that connects you to art is finding patterns in it. But if you
Yeah.
find too many patterns in it, you're kind of tipping over into madness. So
Yeah.
you see fans of both true crime and of like music and painting and film and things like that who are on or like QAnon, coming out of this. I think a lot of things
That's a great
are part of
example.
that same spectrum
Yes.
of it can be beautiful to find patterns and meaning in things, and it can also be really dangerous.
Yeah, thank you for giving me an example of QAnon because that's a fabulous, yeah, like way to string all of this together. And I think, using using Taylor Swift like for Easter eggs as the more quote unquote benign example. Um, I just had this thought this morning, so I'm really glad we're doing this interview today. But I thought like Taylor Swift is someone who is famously codependent with her audience. It's pretty impossible not to be right, like to be that
Yeah,
level of just mega celebrity. And that is a destructive like mega celebrity alone, right? Is
yeah,
a very destructive to the self thing.
right,
But Taylor Swift, who could, likely have done them like anyone, right, has been ultra responsive to her audience and to her reception and to like anticipating everyone's desire to find the next Easter egg, this or that. And I feel like there's a way in which, you can be the kind of manipulator there, right? You can do the cue drops, and
right.
get everyone's cortisol levels spiked because they're like hooked into the mainframe and this is the teleology and this is how I'm going to do my life now.
Yeah,
But there's also, I think, with a celebrity like Taylor Swift, or there's so many other examples, right? There's so many examples here, so I'll focus here. But um, it can, I think, impact the art in a way, yeah, that is unfortunately difficult. Like Showgirl was a bit of a lead balloon for me, and I think it's because Showgirl was so obsessed with its perception of itself and her perception of herself.
yeah.
And so this is, when you bring up like both Courtney Love and Lena Dunham from earlier, Melissa, I'm thinking of one and Britney Spears. Let's throw her in there too.
Yeah.
Artists who are addressing complaints, who are having to like get ahead of narratives and manage their images, which is all necessary, right? Like this is not stuff they can afford not to do, which sucks.
Right.
Um, but like that is such a difficult place to be in and be making art,
Yes. And I
and like, yeah, please, yeah,
And the other thing you're adding on top of that, obviously, is that the further you go up the ladder of mega stardom, the more of your time you're spending on tour or, doing interviews, and the less time you have having experiences that might contribute to you writing about something other than fame. Right? I mean, I think that's
yeah,
probably a tough, I would imagine. That would be a tough thing for Taylor Swift. Like she, a huge part of her life is just this mirror of a mirror of a mirror of a
yeah,
mirror.
yes,
Um, so I would think that'd be, I don't know, it's a hard thing to do. I think that she has been excellent for the most part about making the Easter eggs fun by only telling people enough, but not
sure.
telling them too much, which is a really hard line to walk. But yeah, I mean, I know that some people are not crazy about the new record because so much of it is just about her talking about other people's perceptions of her.
Yeah,
But how
right?
could you not kind of be in that position when you're, yeah, I don't know. I
I
understand.
know, no, I
Yeah.
know. And I'm so aware too, right? It's like she is just in this endless damned if you do kind of situation.
Yeah.
And but maybe that's what distinguished, and I know we could get really fine grained here, and I won't get too fine grained, but that's what distinguishes her for me from someone like Lord, who I think whose latest album was just fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um and but there's kind of like a when you compare that to um well, you compare her latest album to, sorry, I think it's, was it Solar? I
Hmm.
can't think of the one before, but there's like a total disregard for, to my mind, like how she is being perceived and how she like I'm gonna sing about like taking MDMA therapeutically. I'm not gonna talk about how it's therapeutic and it's not like at a like she's not kind of splitting hairs
Yeah.
in a super autobiographical sense. And
Yeah.
so this is me, the excited fan, right? But like I think it just illustrates your point that it's so hard not to read to like graft our sense of meaning onto the artist's work. And
Yeah.
I feel it's almost better the more the artist leaves out, the less
Yes.
like management of perception that she's doing.
I think about that all the time. Like, how much information is too much information for fans to know to get the most out of it? Because you are
It's
kind of, you're looking for a point of connection between your life and the life of the artist or whatever they're singing about, or, a perspective that it doesn't have to be yours, it could be your perspective that you recognized or enriched by. But if you know too much about it and it gets too specific, then you're in danger of being like, nope, I don't relate to that song. Or if somebody makes the sin of saying this song is actually about this. Like people think it's about that, but it's actually about this, and it ruins the song for
yeah.
the people who left it. So it's like it's a really tough thing to try and create mystery, but still not, take the meaning away from fans.
And see, this is why we all have to arrive at the perfect sweet spot. This is the universal and the particular, dazed and confused. This is why I was gonna buy your book. Um, Melissa, thank you so much. This was such an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the little video podcast.
Yeah, you asked such good questions. Thank you so
Uh,
much for having me.
I really appreciate it. That's a high compliment from an interviewer of your calendar.
Thank you.